Hi, everyone. Welcome to California Rebel Base. Kristen is with me. We're going to do something a bit different today. We're going to take one issue, a big topic, and we're going to focus just on that and get really into the details and do a deep dive on the issue. And the issue, Kristen, is homelessness. It's pretty much, I think, is literally top of the list of concerns for people living in the Bay Area. I certainly saw that in a public opinion survey recently. But right across the state, you talk to people and they say, what's going wrong? What's the real kind of, what are the big problems? Of course, they talk about stuff to do with the pandemic because that's been our recent experience. But consistently now for years, homelessness has been just right at the top because it's so symbolic of the failures of governance, I think, in the sense that you've got this incredibly wealthy part of the world, the fifth biggest economy, the Silicon Valley, the richest part of the world. You've got Hollywood, all these sort of centers of power and wealth and the innovation that we have here and all the rest of it. And yet you've got this unbelievable kind of third world type problem on our streets.
Absolutely. It's tragic. And it was a main issue when Gavin ran. It's been a major issue for most of the mayoral races, including London Breed in San Francisco. And we've been, trying to tackle it for, decades here. Right. And while we were on an uptick, right, the number of homeless were going down in California. We started to see a reversal of that starting around 2014. Yeah. So it's just tragic and well said that it really represents, I think, almost the worst problem for a state like California, because you've got, as we've talked about, these big-hearted people. You've got extreme wealth in California, people who want to make sure people are not living on the streets. And because of the government machine, we've just been prevented and blocked from actually instituting real reform.
And every time we talk about it, I find people end up saying something like you hear the same thing. Like, it's very complicated. There are a lot of different factors. That is true. And that's why we're going to spend a lot of time, well, the whole of this show talking just about this. And to help us understand this issue, we're going to be joined by Richie Greenberg. He's a political commentator, a community advocate. He actually ran for mayor of San Francisco. So he's got a lot of perspective on this and a lot of knowledge to share with us. So let's bring in Richie now. Great to see you today. As I just said, it's really, really complicated, lots of different aspects. I just dive in, just tell us, get the ball rolling with just some of your thoughts on this, how you got into the issue, why you've been investigating it, your ideas for how we can solve it. We're going to get to all of that. So I'll open field for you to just take it away.
Great. Thank you. And first of all, thank you for having me here today. So, it's you'll hear it over and over again. It's a very complicated issue. There are so many interrelated factors, so many forces that are at play. You've got politics, which, you would hope that when you're dealing with human life, that you would throw politics aside, that you would think that as human nature, we're mostly good people and we want to help. Yeah. But instead, the government has been taking advantage of our generosity, of our money, of our feelings, of our horror at seeing people living just on the streets. And that's the detriment. That's what's happened. That over the years, since I started getting involved with political, even running for office my interest was back in 2015, late 2015. Mm-hmm. And back then, the budget, the amount of money that was being allocated by City Hall to deal with homeless was a certain amount. And every year, it has gone more and more and more, higher and higher now.
In San Francisco.
Yeah, we're talking about San Francisco, yeah. Mm-hmm. To the point that I believe this year or last year, it was going to reach $1 billion.
What?
$1 billion.
In San Francisco. Sorry for the explanation, but
that's correct.
It's not even that big of a city. I mean, it was a very famous city, but it's not that big. I mean, it's fewer than 1 million people. I mean, San Jose, for example, much less well known, is bigger than San Francisco.
Yeah, that's correct. And you've been here yourself, Steve. I know. And it's not that big of a city. It's 49 square miles, 7 miles wide, 7 miles north, south, a small little town. We have actually 840,000 pre-pandemic, and we lost a whole bunch, so we're in the 700,000 now. So $1 billion includes not only direct money payments to the nonprofit organizations that administer the outreach services, but the government itself, and also time and resources that are expended by the police and fire department to go and answer when they find someone passed out or injured on the street corner. They have to bring all of the whole brigade. They have to bring all the fire trucks and ambulance and police. So when you add all of that together, it's $1 billion. And
Richie, can I back you up a second just for the listeners, the scale of the problem? How many homeless do we have in California? I know it's tough to get accurate data, but the number has gotten quite large.
Yeah, it has. And the pandemic hasn't helped, of course. But here in San Francisco, there are different ways to approach who is considered homeless. And this is another tactic from the politicians to try and extract money from businesses, from the bigger corporations, and from us hardworking taxpayers. That if the number is low, then they'll think, okay, well, you don't need any more money. If the count is higher, then we need to find ways to increase taxes and put more burdens on payments by companies. So one of the reports that just came out in the last week is how many people are the most chronic, that are like the trifecta of homeless, mental illness, and drug addicted. The same, one person, 4,000 of those that are living out on the streets. 4,000 in San Francisco. But when you look at the other criteria, the other factors that the government calls someone homeless, that could be someone that simply was down on their luck. They lost their apartment or they lost their job, and they're clean-cut, hardworking people, but they just happen to be crashing on someone's couch. They don't have a lease in their own name. They are a category of homeless as well. So you can go for the different extremes from being complete mentally ill on the street to just I need a place to stay. Can I stay on your couch for a couple of weeks? That's all considered homeless. So right now, that figure approaches between 8,000 to 10,000
in San Francisco, right?
In San Francisco. Yeah. So some people say we got to, what's the percentage? If it's 800,000 residents and 8,000 are homeless, so it's 1% or more are homeless. Yep. Which I disagree with. I do not agree that we have.
I think we're never going to. I mean, I think you're right to question. I mean, Chris, I think that the numbers I've seen for the state, like 250,000, something like that. Like you've got, it's an incredibly high number. And again, if you're looking at the overall state population, and then you add in all the categories, it's going to be that kind of level. I wanted to just some of the things you said there sort of made me start thinking about the underlying causes, which is often often a good place to start. So when you hear people talk about this issue, the things that people say are, well, there's the mental health. It's caused by mental health problems, and we don't have enough mental health services, and people just can't operate, and they end up living on the streets. Another one, a big one you hear, is housing affordability. You can't afford a home, can't afford anywhere to live. You end up, and you're on this sort of trajectory where maybe you start on someone's couch, then you outstay your welcome, and you end up sleeping in your car. And we hear horrific stories of, like, as you say, I mean, people who are, in every other respect, are kind of completely kind of respectable, decent members of the community, parents who are living in a car with their kids and taking them to school. And then you go further down, maybe you can't afford the car anymore, and then you end up on the street. So the housing affordability, the mental health,
drug use.
Exactly. Let's just get into some of those. Let's just talk about the housing affordability point. Is that a real cause here, or is it just something people say?
It's what people say. It is what the forces that be that are trying to forces are building, affordable housing, building of apartments, building of homes. It has been virtually impossible for a long time to build anything here because we're landlocked. Again, we're a very small city. We're at the tip of a peninsula, so we have water all around us except the southern area. There isn't land here. You can't build anything here. You'd have to tear down something that already exists, either an old down-zoned single-story commercial building on the corner of a main street, which is what they approved, the city approved doing that, but it's very slow. And anything they're going to put up there is going to be more of a market rate condo that's 4 or 5 stories tall. You can't build skyscrapers here that are apartments. It just doesn't work. That doesn't happen. It gets turned down by the planning commission. It just doesn't work. It's not feasible. But to your point, most of us here that are analyzing this and following all of the homelessness, we all know it's not a housing issue. It's not a
That's just really I would have to say that's a provocative thing to say, which I like, because it's good to challenge people's assumptions. Just go deeper on that, would you? Just why is that?
All right,
wrong connection to make.
Yeah, the 3 potential factors would be the affordability of homes, drug addiction, and what was the third that we said?
Mental health.
Mental illness.
Mental illness, sorry. So of the 3, the 2, the mental illness and drug addiction, go hand in hand. And there's no way that you're going to have someone that is addicted and living in a tent and mentally ill as a result, holding down a job to be able to afford a home. It doesn't happen. And the drums of war from all of us activists here in the city are beating louder and louder back. We're pushing back against city hall leaders, the elected officials, to let them know that their agenda, their narrative is completely false, completely bogus. You don't have people here moving for a job, looking for affordable homes, and then suddenly become homeless. And not be able to find affordable housing. They wouldn't. What if someone
moved? The scenario that I've this is anecdotal, and a lot of my understanding of it is through local reporting and so on. And you hear this down in LA, here in San Francisco. Someone who has a job, so they move here. For example, there's a lot of, that's actually gone the other way recently because of the pandemic, but people have been moving to California for the opportunity, tech job, whatever it may be, well-paid job. They can afford somewhere. It may not be very big, but they can afford it because it's well-paid, and that's a whole other question. And then they lose their job for whatever reason. And that's the moment when they hit the kind of skids, because you don't have a job and then you're stuck and you can't make rent payments. And then what do? That's the scenario you hear a lot.
Yes, but you don't really see that happening very often. If someone moves here for a tech job, they're going to be paid between $100,000 and $200,000 a year. They have a lot of money that is in the bank right now because of the pandemic, and we still haven't opened completely at all. We're nowhere near that. So these they're younger for the first. They're in their mid to late 20s, and they have so much disposable income. If there's a problem with their employer, if their employer goes bust, they can easily find another job in tech. They just jump from one major tech company to the next. Also, they can work remotely. And this is what another trend is also. The city right now, if you've been touring around, if you drive around here, it feels like it's emptied out. It definitely has. And that's because people are remote working. Either they're at home or they've moved somewhere where they're allowed now to live in a less expensive area. And they can telecommute. And this is something that technology has actually offered us decades ago with the beginning of the internet to be able to do this. And this is something that I thought about years ago. Why isn't there more of this? Why does everybody have to be in San Francisco? But we're digressing. People don't move here for a high-paying job and then suddenly find themselves living in a car or on the streets because their job got lost. They move back to where they came from. They move back to their parents' house. Many, I know many tech younger kids, we call them kids, right, in their 20s. They live in big houses, big, beautiful houses around the city, 4, 6 people. So
what's sorry to interrupt you, but what would you say is a more typical profile? I know there's no kind of, just give us a sort of picture of the kinds of people who would be more typical.
More typical would be those who are homeless, or that whole drug addicted. We're going to move to San Francisco because we hear that the drugs are plentiful. We will be supported by the government. We can go live in tents and have fun. That's what we're seeing. We're seeing a lot of people that move here for the free ride. And that's the problem. That's what's happening.
I'm going to push back a smidge, Richie, because I think people are going to say, what is he talking about? People don't choose homelessness. So I want to respond to that a bit. One, I think where we could probably agree is I do think that there is an affordability of housing issue. Where we would agree, though, is we've been trying to solve that problem for a decade, and we've thrown billions of dollars at that problem. And I'm not sure anybody in Sacramento is actually really serious about solving that problem. We would be easing regulations. It wouldn't take 10 years to build affordable housing. I mean, look at Candlestick Park. The voters approved building there 10 years ago. Nothing is, I mean, it's still, as far as I can tell, I drive by almost every day. It's still a hole in the ground. Nothing has happened. You've got, 4,000 acres of open preserve in the Bay Area that if the state was serious about doing something, perhaps Stanford, there could be a deal with Stanford to figure that out. But I don't think we're serious about solving the affordability of housing issue. And so I think that is an issue. I definitely think drug abuse and mental illness contribute, but it's probably three of those mixed together. And it's curious to me because I don't know why we all can't come together and say, all right, whatever we've done hasn't worked. Right. Yeah. Let's start moving from here.
I want to echo that. I think that certainly one thing I think we can agree on is the affordable housing crisis. It's a crisis in its own right because regardless of its impact on homelessness, which we can debate, because it's just, the prices of homes are just extraordinarily high. And if you're not in one of those well-paying tech jobs, if you're a teacher or work in a sort of more normal industry, not tech in the Bay Area and the equivalent in LA, then in the big sort of metro areas, then it's just incredibly hard to afford anything. And you hear people, genuinely having to make, 2-hour, 3-hour commutes each way to get to their jobs. I take your point about remote working, but some of these jobs, in fact, it's more likely to be the jobs that can't be done remotely, that pay less and require people to live, hours away and do the commute and so on. And therefore, let alone the kind of transportation impact there, but just the fact of, 2 or 3 hours, sort of 4, 5, 6 hours of your day in a car rather than being with your family or your friends or whatever. So that's the affordability issue is something that we need to tackle in its own right.
That's right.
And I think that what I'm sort of hearing you say, Richie, is that there's this sort of pull factor, which is yes, people are pulled to California because of the myth of the land of opportunity. And that's, of course, declining in ways that we talk about often, but, it's still there. But there's these other pull factors. And you're saying it's like, people know that they're going to get taken care of, regardless of whether they're working or not, living on the streets or not. There's also the other issue is the climate, right? That's something again you hear a lot. The fact that the winters are not as like it's not if you're going to be out on the streets, California is going to be better than the middle of Michigan in winter, for example.
Yeah, that's correct. I have lots of family in Michigan. I've been there in the winter. Right? You don't want to be there. But there have been studies. There have been what we call the count, the one point in time where the volunteers go around with government representatives and they count how many homeless there are, and they try and get as much information as they can about who these people are. It's like 30 or 40% minimum are not from here. They've moved here specifically to take advantage of the extremely liberal climate of the government here, giving away, giving free needles, giving any kind of benefits to people. They come from just the outside surrounding towns and as far away as the East Coast and the South, because they hear if they can get to San Francisco, it's nirvana for them. And this is something that's been going on for years. This is not something that has just been exposed last week. This has been going on for a long time. People know that they can come here and they can be taken care of and won't be shoved off the street. So they're given rights. And this is clearly extremely problematic, where other states don't do this, even those that have nicer climates. So it's not just that California has a great climate. San Francisco does not have a great climate. We all know that.
That's right.
Right? It's not
Southern California. Yeah.
Southern California, yes. But
I think that's right. I want to switch to talking about kind of how we address some of these things. And one of the things you talked about mental health. One of the other points I just wanted to throw in, which I think is important to be, to be aware of, is that I've seen, when people have looked at the status of and the health of people who are living on the streets, the really kind of the hard end of this problem, not just people who can't, maybe in sort of housing or temporary housing, whatever, but actually living on the streets. I think a very high proportion who've been there for over a year. It's unbelievable to think that that's, the case, but people who've been there for a year, I think over 70%, something like that, have been found to have serious mental health conditions. But the interesting thing I found when I looked at that study was that when you look at people who are more newly living on the streets, who've just been there for a couple of weeks or months, just when they first arrive, they don't have the mental health problems. Actually being homeless creates the mental health problems in a lot of cases. And that says to me that we're just doing a terrible job of kind of stopping that cycle, of not intervening, because being on the street, living on the street, and it's no wonder. I mean, I can totally see that. So the mental health problems are caused by being homeless. And so so let's just talk about how we intervene, because what's your experience of this, of what, the response, the kind of government response in terms of people who are on the street?
Living on the street is not necessarily a mental illness inducing situation. There's a whole segment of the people who are homeless. They simply want to live off the grid. And that's understandable. People say, I don't want to pay taxes. I don't want to get a job. I don't want to have any responsibility. I want a bank account. I don't want a cell phone. I want nothing. I just want to hang with my friends in a tent. And they do that. That is a certain segment that's within the homeless count. So just simply being on the street does not induce mental illness. It's the drug factor. It's being addicted to very, very cheap or almost free drugs. The drug dealers, which are here on the streets now, peddling their wares, supplying addicts, getting them more addicted with more powerful and more dangerous drugs on a daily basis. Mm-hmm. And they exist here with virtual impunity. I mean, we all know the DA here that is now facing a recall, the District Attorney Chester Bodine, has identified, saying that at least 50% of those that are the dealers that are dealing with all these dangerous drugs and getting people completely whacked out of their mind or dead from the lethalness of these drugs are foreigners. They're from Honduras. He specifically said on camera they are from Honduras, and that they are here with family back home to them. And we don't want to touch these dealers because we don't want to see any repercussions against their family back in Honduras. So that's why they won't. This is his reason why he says they're not going to touch the drug dealers. He had a town hall a couple of months ago on camera, and this is exactly what he said. So he's injecting his own foreign policy, and why, but but
there's even statewide issues. So I don't think voters intended this with Prop 47, but it was labeled something fabulous, probably like the Safe Neighborhoods Act or something lovely. So nobody knew what they were voting on, and it sounded really good.
Warm and fuzzy, yes.
Which one was that, Kristen?
It decriminalized a bunch of basically petty crimes. So
the petty crime thing, under $1,000, wasn't it?
That's right, and it's per day. So you can actually go to Walgreens, steal $900 worth of goods per day. And I don't mean to joke about it or mock it. This is really what's actually happening in order to fuel their drug habits. So we, in the name of humanity, we're doing the most inhumane things by saying it's okay and a right for these people to live on the street. I'm sure you know, Richie, the Ninth Circuit ruled that unless there is a bed available, if a police officer is not 100% sure that a bed is available, you cannot fine or otherwise do anything to disperse a homeless person who's camping on the street or is otherwise just out on the street using drugs, et cetera. And then we've given them an income opportunity, which is steal less than $1,000 per day, go, hustle those goods. And now you've got money to fuel your drug habit. And it's just absolutely tragic what we've done. And we're not being honest with the voters in California about what we've all contributed to.
Yeah,
and
it's really interesting.
So we're solving the wrong problems.
It's really interesting. I've got to say that, I appreciate your, you're not allowing us, Richie, to push you off your point of view, which I have to say is a real challenge, because the conventional wisdom is that it goes back to that housing affordability point, right? And that kind of law and order aspect, or the kind of public, is just not allowed into the conversation a lot of the time. And actually, it does remind me of something, back in the day in the UK, when I was, a long time, when Tony Blair was the Prime Minister, and there was a similar, not the scale of what we see here in California today, but there was a really serious homelessness problem in London. And really the same kind of thing, not the same scale, but, like you'd walk around the center of town and just really visible homelessness everywhere. And he said, we got to do something about it. And actually he hired someone who was, who became a good friend, who I then got into the government when I was working there. She was the head of a homelessness charity, and if you like, on the kind of left liberal side of politics, but to run the kind of, I think they call it the Rough Sleepers Unit, to solve the problem. And actually, in the end, she got to that same conclusion, which is that it is that, I mean, it's a cliche, isn't it? But it's the sort of tough love set of ideas, which is you've got to be clear that there's certain types of behavior that we're just not going to tolerate. People who may not know what is best for them because they are either so addicted to drugs, or the combination of the drugs and the mental health issues mean they're not in a position to make wise judgments about what they want to be doing with their life, whatever. You've got to sort of get them into treatment, get them out of that situation, literally get them off the streets, and start to really help them put their lives back on track. And that does require you to be pretty tough, actually.
Yes.
And it seems to me there's just you can't even entertain that with the current kind of liberal approach to this. Is that a fair way of putting it?
Yes, absolutely. We're not there yet. We're not there. The powers that be in City Hall here in San Francisco instead are looking for ways to monetize this whole thing.
Oh my gosh.
They're monetizing it. They're finding ways to create new agencies, new divisions, new departments, new levels of government, expanding, growing government, to find ways to cater and deal with the homeless and drug addicts,
rather than solve the problem.
And they're not looking to solve it. They're looking to monetize it. They're looking to find kickbacks to friends and associates. This is being well documented now in the past year or so with FBI corruption scandals and arrests and people going down in flames that have been around for years, that are in government, people who have been
where can people read more about that, Richie, if people want to follow up on that? Just give us some specific things if people want to Google stuff.
Here, this was the kingpin. This is what came down last year. Mohammed Nuru, N-U-R-U, Mohammed Nuru. He worked in one of the departments here, one of the agencies that he wound up being arrested, of course, corruption, wire fraud, all of that, because he was directing bribes around the city, different business owners that wanted to open a restaurant like at the airport, for example, paid a bribe, and then bribery. This is why he was arrested. And one by one, anyone that was associated with him is now going down. So there have been multiple arrests.
You're not wrong. I just did a.
You do a quick Google search, you find it. Yeah. How about that public works guy who was
Mohammed
taking
Nuru, San Francisco?
That's right. Yeah.
Bought and sold by Confederate. Yeah, this is.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think this is a rich seam you've opened up there. I'm going to look into that.
Again, anywhere where there's a market, you're going to find fraud. And if people are, concerned that maybe, Richie, you're being too harsh, look, there's an AP report that in the past 3 years, we just did an audit of the state of California. In the past 3 years, we've spent $13 billion with a B across 9 agencies on homelessness. So every voter in the state needs to say, okay, where did that money go? Because how is it that we see we can see with our own eyes an increase in the number of unsheltered homeless? We know this. Don't tell me that I don't see what I see. This is an epidemic. And that money clearly didn't go to help these people. So it clearly went to line some pockets of people who are studying things or, it's all this nonsense about committees and let me study it. There's some fraud in there. But the voters deserve an answer. Where'd the money go? Because now Gavin's asking for another 20.
Oh, my gosh. And the other thing that I find so frustrating is that you've got the kind of opportunism, the political opportunism. So they've taken it's a bit like you're saying, Richard, they've taken the pandemic and they said, well, they invented this thing, Project Room Key. This was the Gavin Newsom thing, which is now being replicated, which is like, we obviously, we shut down everything, no tourism, empty hotels. Let's put homeless people into hotels. Project Room Key. That's the solution. As if we never want to have tourism back, as if we never want to have hotels, of course. And so they sort of trumpet this as a solution, and then it gets picked up. I saw the mayor of Oakland, Libby Schaaf, doing her own version of Project Room Key. When you actually look at the numbers, it's like, I don't know, like 200 people. It's just nothing. It's all just PR.
It's marketing.
Yes, exactly. What is Richie? Funnily enough, it's just so much to talk about. We don't have too much time left. What do you make of Project Room Key? I just want to get your comment on that, because it seems to be that's where they're putting a lot of their kind of focus. Like, we've got this solution now. I saw Gavin Newsom tweeting the other day, we've led the way in how to solve we've created a model for the rest of the country to follow in terms of tackling homelessness, Project Room Key. And the Biden administration is now taking our model. And you know what I mean? What do you think?
It's balderdash. I don't usually use that word very often, but it's complete hogwash. It's BS.
Right.
Again, this goes back to just finding ways to monetize, finding ways to pay, people, political allies. It's a cheap shot way to get people off the street. Seizing hotels was a theme last year. Maybe about 6-7 months ago, we had people here in the Board of Supervisors, that's our city council, that were just screaming like cackling chickens, just saying, we can seize the hotels, seize the hotels. If you don't give us enough room, we're going to seize the hotels, and throwing everybody in there. And that will solve the homeless. No, it won't. It won't. And as you brought up, that's going to keep people from wanting to come to this city because if they have to go to a hotel, they don't want to go to one that has remnants of someone that was homeless living in there.
Can I ask you a question? It would be great to hear from you, since you're so knowledgeable about San Francisco. This $1.6 million on the tent city that I understand bought 262, I might be wrong there, maybe it's 282 tents outside.
16.1 million.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Okay, there you go.
It's always worse.
It's
California, like whatever you think it is.
I was going to say 16 and I thought it can't be. It literally can't be. So I changed it on the fly. But that is outrageous. For what? I heard even the Board of Supervisors was saying, we have no idea why this cost so much money. What happened? And nobody knows where the money went.
It's 16.1 million, which when you divide it through is about $61,000 per tent. And that's because we have. I
could go to the REI, do a lot better than that. Especially with my member discount.
They created these things called safe sleeping sites, and there's one that is just across the way from City Hall, next to the Asian Art Museum and the library, the main library of the city. They take a open plaza and they put chain link fence all around it, and they put dark green tarp around it so you can't see in. And then they let homeless people set up their tents in there. But it's supposed to be controlled. It's supposed to be controlled entry, security. And that's where the money's going to. It's to administer this. And then any services that they want, and any joking like food delivery. Can you get Uber Eats to deliver there? Maybe. And the homeless can wander out and go hang around and pass out in the park between that area and City Hall steps, and then go back and sleep. So this is the way that, again, I've said it many times, this is how they're monetizing the homeless. They're monetizing, they're finding ways. And how do they hide all of this? There are nonprofits that are administering all these services. When the taxpayers' money and City Hall coffers go and they pay for these homeless outreach organizations to do their services, it goes to a nonprofit. So they're not. It's hidden. You can't see all of this anymore. So that's where the money goes. Especially if it's a religious nonprofit, then there's no accountability whatsoever, because the books, you can audit all you want. And I have on my shelf right here, I've got audits from 2016, and then more recently there was an audit. If the government isn't going to do anything and act on what they find, if something looks suspicious, if something looks like they're spending too much money, it doesn't matter. It's just going to gather dust on the shelf. They're not going to act on the audit.
So you know what, this all right. We have to leave it there, Richie. But I just got a couple of thoughts, and Kristen, and you may have as well, just to wrap it up. But one thing that just came to mind as you're talking, and again, I just want to emphasize, it's really interesting to have this perspective because it is just totally different from the normal conversation. And you've got this very clear view, which is, no, this is about really kind of weak policies on law and order, crime, public space. And it all reminds me of what we heard about, everyone talked about for so long, the way Rudy Giuliani cleaned up New York with the broken windows theory. I know that phrase has been interpreted in different ways, but it reminded me of a story, a headline. Was it a headline or two? Anyway, just recently, one of our guests, Susan Shelley, from the Orange County Register and various other media outlets, she tweeted out this story about the amount of solid waste that had been removed from Echo Park in Los Angeles, which had turned into a homeless village over the last year or so with the pandemic. And then they closed it down, cleaned it out. There's a sort of enormous amount of just waste that they had to be removed. And she said, save this story. One day, it will explain how Rudy Giuliani was elected mayor of LA. I thought that was such a sort of, because it's just this point that at some point, even in California, people will demand that kind of approach, because the Democrat approach, the liberal approach, is absolutely at best making no difference, at worst making the problem worse. One last thing I'll say before I hand over to Kristen is the affordable housing piece, which is often the first response here. It is so important. There's so much to talk about there, particularly as you mentioned, Kristen, in terms of the regulations that CEQA, the environmental regulations that make it so costly and a lengthy process to build anything anywhere. That is something we need to dig into properly on another occasion. But final thoughts, Kristen, on what Richie's been saying today.
Very provocative, because I'm thinking of what Richie's saying and Echo Park. Because Echo Park, as we know, the homeless were essentially moved out of that area. But before they were moved, they were offered housing and medical services, and the vast majority, declined. So, Richie, what you're saying is provocative, but I think people need to dig in on what you're saying and learn about it, because if we're not solving the right problems and we only go with one narrative, then we're not going to find the right solution. And
exactly
we're
right.
in the middle of it.
Richie, thank you very much. Really appreciate you being with us today. See you soon.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone, for joining us. See you next time.